Welcome back to the Dynasty Nerds YouTube page. I'm here, Garrett Price, and I've got my good friend Pete Bartosky, and we're going to go through the second and third round, so day two of the NFL draft. We're going to be breaking down all of these fantasy relevant picks, positions. We're going to try to cover it. It's not going to be super long, not super in depth, but just going to give some quick thoughts on each one of the landing spots and maybe even some surprises on guys that we didn't see. So Pete, why don't we go through pick by pick of guys that are fantasy relevant for us, and then we can kind of touch on that.
Yep. So first pick, 33, surprise, Bills draft Keon Coleman.
I want to like this pick because the Bills desperately need a wide receiver. Desperately. Yep. However, I talked about it in the scouting report when we were talking about Coleman. I loved him as a big slot. I did not love him necessarily as an X receiver. He is more than likely going to be playing the X there. They don't have somebody of that body type to play there. And Shakir and Curtis Samuel are both guys that are more natural fits to play the slot. Yeah. So I think they're going to use him as an outside receiver. He's not somebody that runs great routes and separates well. So for me, I don't love this one.
Okay, next one, friend of the show, kind of, not really personally, but Lad McConkey goes to the Chargers.
Rich was nuts on this. He was so excited. And honestly, such a good pick. He is going to be funneled targets. He's going to be in that Keenan Allen role, and he's just going to absolutely crush. So for me, I don't know that there was a better player and spot fit on day two than Lad McConkey to the Chargers.
And where do you see him going in drafts?
I'm guessing he's going to be right on that tipping point between round one and round two.
Okay. Jalen Polk goes to the Patriots.
This was a surprise for me. I know that there were some rumblings that this could be a possibility that he would go, on early on day two. I had him more as a round three, round four kind of guy. So this was a surprise to me. Obviously, this is a team that desperately needed a wide receiver. So I'm not surprised in the sense that they took one because, yes, it's something they desperately needed. But he's somebody that is a bit one-dimensional. It's really just being a great contested catch guy. That's really what he does. And he does it fantastic. So it is still a weapon for Drake May. But I think there were some better receivers still on the board.
And so are you, if he's there late second round, are you getting them there, or you're still not touching them?
I'm probably closer to the beginning of round three.
Okay. Awesome pick coming up right here. Jonathan Brooks goes to the Panthers.
Yeah, a team that desperately needed a running back, a guy that can do it all, receiving, rushing game. So this will be kind of what they, obviously not nearly as gifted and talented as this guy, but kind of what they were missing in Christian McCaffrey. This is a running back that you can just do everything. You don't have to take him off the field. We'll see how quickly he gets moved into the true starting role. Obviously, it's not going to take too long, but he is recovering from that ACL injury, so it might take a little bit of time, but it's a great fit. Panthers weren't my favorite landing spot. Obviously, we had some other ones that we thought were a little bit juicier, but I still think it's a good spot and good opportunity.
So, like, gut feeling, what's his highest finish that he could realistically have this season?
This season, probably like running back 12, 13, like right on the cusp of that running back one, because there's an opportunity to maybe have enough volume to do it, but I just don't see a scenario where he can get much past that because I think he'll be a little bit capped early, just kind of recovering from that injury.
Next pick, kind of a faller. Adonai Mitchell goes to the Colts.
Yeah, so Adonai, this was somebody that was talked about as a potential round one pick. We thought that he would go pretty early on day two. He was still a second round pick, but what was it, pick 52, 51, something like that?
52, yep.
52. So a little bit farther than I would have liked to have seen him drop. I don't think there's any question about the ability of Adonai Mitchell. And I think that's why he was still a second round pick. But there might be something to he didn't interview well. And, there were people that talked about that he didn't interview super well. There were some questions about his production level. So I think this was how teams kind of balanced it out. Do we want to risk it above guys that have better production profiles? Might be better teammate locker room type guys, might be a little bit more football junkies versus a guy that, didn't have some of those things. But I think when you look on raw athleticism, you look at raw receiving ability, I mean, the dude has it. So really, even though I don't think this is an amazing spot for Adonai, this is awesome news for Anthony Richardson, because Anthony Richardson got an awesome player that's going to take a lot of pressure off Michael Pittman Jr. And now you have Josh Downs in the slot. Those are three very, very talented wide receivers that they have on this team. And then you have Jonathan Taylor in the backfield. This is going to be a very good offense this year.
Yeah. And Joe Flacco,
backing him up. Yep. There you go.
Ben Sinnott.
Yeah.
Commanders.
So our only round 2 tight end. We only had one round 2 tight end and one round 3 tight end. So when I did that solo mini podcast talking about how this was one of the weaker tight end classes outside of a Brock Bowers. We're kind of seeing that. Only 2 day 2 tight ends is a very, very low number. But Ben has the best opportunity out of all these guys. He can do a little bit of everything. He can block, he can catch, he can run. Does some good things after the catch. So good opportunity. It's a team that needs a tight end. Zach Ertz is there, and what a great guy to learn from. One of the better ones that we've had in the game for a while. So great guy to learn from. But in a year or two, this is going to be his job, and I think he's going to be a great additional target for Jaden Daniels.
And so let's say tight end premium leagues.
Okay.
What range are you looking at picking them up at?
End of round 2.
Okay.
In tight end premium, probably end of round 2. He would be similar range to Jalen Polk. I'd probably take him ahead of Jalen Polk.
Okay.
But it would be right in that range.
Great. Next one, the Jets select Malachi Corley.
Yeah, so now we're into round 3.
Yep.
Corley's not a guy I loved his tape, and this is kind of roughly where I was expecting he would go. Right in the round 3 range. I thought there was a chance he could fall to round 4, but I thought round 3 was probably the most likely. Great run after the catch. There's obviously a lot of mouths to feed in New York, but I do think that he's going to be more than adequate there. I think he's going to be probably somebody that helps the real-life NFL team more than your fantasy football team.
Okay. So like early, mid, third.
Exactly.
Okay. Now here's a flashy pick. Trey Benson goes to the Cardinals.
Love this pick. Obviously, James Conner's there. They're gonna share some time in year 1, but it's gonna be his job, and he's gonna be awesome on this team. He's gonna be able to tote the load. He can carry. He can carry the football. He can catch well enough. I wouldn't say that was a strength of his. So I was a little surprised that was the landing spot, because I would have pictured them with somebody that was maybe a little bit more of a receiver, but. All that to be said, he's gonna absolutely dominate there. I'm gonna have a really hard time deciding between Benson or Brooks. Looking at those two, my gut at the moment is Brooks, because we do have round 2 capital versus round 3 capital, but I had them both graded so closely. I think both landing spots are solid with some good opportunity. So I'm gonna have a really hard time deciding between those two.
It's one of those things, though, that the Cardinals definitely have a safer floor. Offensively.
Sure.
But, yeah.
But opportunity in Carolina might be a little more plentiful, so we'll have to see.
Yeah. Next pick, kind of a surprise, kind of exciting pick right here. Jermaine Burton goes to the Bengals.
I liked this one quite a bit. Obviously, we're going to like it more if T. Higgins ends up getting moved, but it doesn't look like that's going to happen if no trades were made on day 1 or day 2. Seems unlikely that he would get dealt, but he did actually request a trade, which Brandon Ayuk or Deebo Samuel never did. So there is a slightly higher chance, but just doesn't seem like it's going to happen. But this seems like, hey, this is a year where Jermaine Burton learns. He's probably going to play mostly out of the slot. And then in year 2, he's going to take on a much bigger role, because I don't see a scenario where T. Higgins is back on this team after this year, even if they decide not to trade him this year.
So how do you think he profiles in the slot?
I think he's awesome in the slot. I think he'd be fine on the outside too. I don't have any worries about that. But he's an excellent route runner. He's got a very quick get off. I think you're putting corners or nickel corners, backers, safeties on him. Like they're gonna have a hard time really keeping up with him because he's really, really solid all the way around. So I think Jermaine Burton, I think it was a good fit. I think he's a good player. So yeah, I'm all in for that.
Okay, kind of a not super exciting pick right here, but Tip Ryman goes to the Cardinals again.
I'm going to be honest. I don't know a ton about him. I know that he tested well.
Yeah.
And I know that he was primarily a blocker in college, but this wasn't somebody that we really spent a lot of time focusing on. So I'm going to have to go back and watch a little bit of his tape and see. But obviously their tight end room it's Trey McBride. Trey McBride's their tight end. So I don't anticipate him getting a lot of receiving options. My guess is he's probably going to be on those run fits. They would rather have him in there as opposed to Trey McBride.
Okay. Which ultimately is kind of a plus.
Yeah, it's a boost for Trey Benson.
Oh, yeah. I was thinking Trey McBride for a second. I was like, but so now kind of a downer pick, in my opinion. Blake Corum goes to the Rams.
Yeah, weird one. I didn't expect the Rams to necessarily go running back. I would have guessed receiver for them before running back. So it was a little bit odd with how well he performed last year. But I think it was just speaks to how frustrated they were when he went down. They did not get good production out of their other running backs. Yeah. So, you look at this team, I think it's a team that is maybe wanting to have a little bit more of a committee than they did last year. So I do think this is going to be annoying for Kyren Williams, but I still like Kyren a lot. I still think he's a great player, but obviously this cuts into his workload.
Okay. Next pick, another Michigan player. Roman Wilson goes to the Steelers.
Yeah. Roman Wilson to the Steelers. It's the Deontay Johnson replacement.
Yeah.
That's exactly what it is the Deontay Johnson replacement. He's going to fit in really, really well there. I really don't have any complaints about that at all. I think he's a good route runner. He reminds me a little bit of Jermaine Burton. In fact, I think they profile as similar players. I like Burton a little bit more, but he's going to be a smooth operator. And I think the Steelers did it again. They took a solid day 2 wide receiver, and he's going to develop into a very solid NFL player.
There we go. Quick question with Blake Corum. Where are you going to draft him?
He's a tough one. He's a tough one because I do still think Kyren is probably the lead back.
So he's kind of just an insurance back.
I don't think he's an insurance back because I think he is going to be involved, and I think they'll use them somewhat interchangeably because it's hilarious. The comp that I gave before was Kyren Williams looking at Blake Corum, an undersized running back that isn't going to test super well but has good instincts. Now, I liked Kyren Williams more, but obviously Blake Corum has the better draft capital compared to Kyren Williams. But at this point, it'll be Kyren's third year in the league. Draft capital means nothing at this point, other than the fact that they didn't have to pay him much. So I do think Blake Corum is involved, but I think it's just going to be a messy two-headed monster where Corum's more of the B than the A. So for me, he's another one of those guys that is probably going to be right around a third-round pick.
Okay.
In that early third.
Gotcha. Another confusing pick. Marshawn Lloyd goes to the Packers.
Man, I hated this. I did not like this at all. I really, really wanted him to go somewhere else. Now, the Josh Jacobs deal, even if it is a 4-year deal, they do have an out after 1 year and it'll only be a $9 million cap hit. So it could be the kind of thing where if Josh Jacobs doesn't have a monster year 1, they could move on. But my guess is they're going to be committed to him for at least 2 years. So this is going to be a frustrating situation. I think it's going to be a lot like what we saw Tank Bigsby this past year in Jacksonville with Travis Etienne, where, he's going to come in and he'll get 4 or 5 touches a game and he'll spell them at times. But I think Josh Jacobs is their guy. So this is a really frustrating one because we were dying for more running backs, and this kind of snatched a pretty good one from us.
Tampa Bay Buccaneers get another wide receiver in Jalen McMillan from Washington.
Yeah, McMillan, I think he's a solid player. I don't think that there's anything that he does special, but I think he is a good route runner. I think he's got solid hit. Like, there's nothing in his profile where I'm like, ew. Everything in his profile is solid, but there's nothing special in his profile. So he strikes me as a guy that would be an awesome complement to Mike Evans and Chris Godwin, but that's probably about it.
Okay. And then the last pick and the last fantasy football relevant player is Luke McCaffrey.
Yeah.
Commanders picked him. What do you think of that?
That one surprised me a little bit too. There were some receivers on the board you would have assumed would have gone by now that haven't. So definitely a little bit of a surprise. I think Luke was an okay player, but I didn't see enough there to warrant a third round pick. I had him more as a like fifth round type of guy.
Okay.
So this was a little bit of a surprise pick for me, but you know, he's got the bloodlines and he's got enough raw skill that maybe they believe they can turn him into something, but he's not a young prospect either. So it's going to take some time. So we'll see. We'll see. But it's interesting because this means that we left day 2 with no Jalen Wright going anywhere, with no Troy Franklin going anywhere. Like there were some names that were bigger names. Both of these guys, I mean, Troy Franklin, there were rumblings about him being at the end of the first round, and now he's on day 3. So, I mean, that's a massive, massive fall from where people were expecting. Jalen Wright, you know, potentially a day 2 guy, but a round 2 guy, but a lot of people assumed round 3. So the fact that he fell to round 4 is a pretty big surprise, I think, overall. So it'll be really interesting to see, you know, who gets prioritized, because there's still plenty of good players that have ended up going into day 3 and blossomed into awesome guys. So it's not a death sentence, but it is kind of surprising a few of the players that haven't gone yet.
And so we didn't really talk about this, but can you give me one riser and one faller from today?
Yeah, I would say the faller is probably got to be Troy Franklin. He just didn't get drafted. So I think that's a huge fall from where people were originally taking him. A guy that was talked about as a first round startup pick. So I think he's the biggest faller in the fact that he didn't go in this round at all. If it was somebody in the draft, I'd probably say Marshawn Lloyd was probably the biggest faller.
Yeah.
If it was somebody that's actually drafted. Biggest riser for me is probably either Jalen Polk, just because I didn't have him in this range, but you second round draft capital, you have a plan for this guy. Yeah. So Jalen Polk is probably the biggest riser on this. You can make a case for Jermaine Burton as well. I think that's a pretty good spot for him. You know, the other running backs, Corum, we don't love the spot. The other 2, we expected them to kind of get drafted in this range to good teams. So, yeah, there's nobody that I think was like a huge, like Ricky Pearsall was last night or something like that. I don't think there's anybody that's a huge riser, but there's definitely some guys that hurt themselves by either not the best situation or not even going today.
Well,
thanks, man.
Yeah, you bet.
I appreciate it. So that was Pete. Follow him on Twitter at, what is it at?
Oh, man, I forget. I think it's like Pete Bartosky.
I don't know. It used to be something like Happy Guitarist or something. You switched
it used
up.
to be something. I don't really post that much.
All right. So. Follow Dynasty Nerds account. He's the one running the Dynasty Nerds account. You can follow me on Twitter at Dynasty Price. Appreciate you guys tuning in. We'll have our big recap of all of this, our mock drafts, our rankings, all that stuff are coming up very soon.
See ya.